Hello and welcome to The Navel Gaze, a podcast about autosexuality. My name is Tali. This is my co-host, Aaron Terrell. And today we are joined by two very exciting guests, Diane and Hunter. Diane and Hunter are people that I follow on Twitter. I would probably classify them as like autistic political Twitter. I don't know if that's reaching or if you guys would push back on that classification. But it's what a lot of people would call sort of like right-wing, I guess, politics. But I think it strikes me more as just the thoughts of people who are unencumbered by social pressures, basically. And so I really appreciate following both of you. And I think you're great follows. What brings you both on the show today is that I spotted Diane tweeting casually about, there's all these ugly women in my DMs, and I wish it was just some, sexy AGP. And so I tweeted, when are you going to come on to The Navel Gaze to be our second female chaser? And I figured Diane doesn't know me, but Hunter and I are mutuals and you guys are mutuals. So I said, I'm going to sweeten the pot by tagging Hunter in here and saying you guys could come on together. And luckily for me, you both agreed. So that's what brings us here today. I think we're planning to talk about basically what it's like dating as a self-aware autogynephile and what it's like to be a woman who's into these type of men and into this type of dynamic. So we're really excited to have you both here.
Thanks so much. Very excited to be here. I think this will be fun.
Okay, cool. So I wonder if maybe it makes more sense to start with you, Hunter. And maybe I know I first found you on Benjamin Boyce's podcast, and I also saw your conversation with Phil Illey. I think both of them are excellent, but especially your conversation with Phil, I think really everyone should watch. I think it's a really underappreciated conversation, sort of musings on malehood, manhood, and sort of integrating autogynephilia in a really realistic and rational way. So maybe we'll have you start with a little bit of your story. People can go see the other episodes if they want more details, but would you mind starting us off?
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as my history with my own AGP feelings goes, I think I probably first consciously noticed it sometime around puberty, which is fairly typical. I noticed that, I was uncomfortable with a lot of the changes that were happening to my body, right? Like I didn't like growing like, body hair. It felt weird and kind of, horror-like. And then not too long after that, I discovered, kind of like, feminization content and felt an immediate affinity for that. But I processed it at the time. It's funny, I was really more correct then. I processed it as just a paraphilia. I was like, oh, this is a weird thing I'm into, probably something I won't bring up to other people because it feels kind of strange, but, whatever, lots of people are into lots of weird stuff,
So you're saying like it felt completely disconnected. Like you didn't see the association between like the horror and like your, masculinizing body and the appreciation for that kind of pornographic content. You didn't see the two as associated at first. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. No, I didn't see any connection between those two things. And, to be fair, like a lot of people feel strange, going through puberty. So, it might have been more strange for me, but I don't really have any way to subjectively access how strange it is for people that aren't autosexual. So it really just kind of hummed along like that from, around puberty until age 26. When I just fell down essentially the Reddit rabbit hole, right? And I saw people, for the first time in my life describing a lot of feelings I'd had kind of in the back of my mind and then telling me what they meant, right? They're like, oh, actually, if you feel X, Y, and Z, they make all these memes that's like, oh, when you feel like this and then you realize, and then I'm like, I feel like that. So I guess, this is me. And I wasn't aware of any kind of, counter narrative to this. And, this is kind of a broader point. I'll try not to branch out too much, but I think that, you mentioned at the beginning that, Diane and I are often kind of perceived as being on the right, but not in a really typical way. And like, I think this relates to why I just sort of accepted the sort of gender ideology narrative so uncritically, is because the only pushback against the social left that I'd ever seen came from Christian conservatives, right? And like, I'm not a Christian. I'm somebody with a pretty skeptical mindset. And so it's given that like I'd never seen any social conservative, position advocated for on its actual merits, right? I just assumed there were no such arguments, right? So anyway, yeah, I fell down that rabbit hole, and within a couple weeks of finding these subreddits talking about these experiences, I made an appointment at Planned Parenthood for HRT, went in, walked right back out with a prescription, after about 30 minutes of consultation.
Typical Rajni boy, Hunter.
Yeah. And then, I took estrogen for about 4.5 years. About 2 years in, I also, I got breast augmentation and facial feminization surgery. The breast implants have been removed since then. But yeah, and then I had what sort of turned it all around. And I'm not recommending this generally, especially given, in light of current events. I'm not a big advocate for psychedelics, but in my particular case, a really strong experience with psychedelic mushrooms basically upended my entire worldview, right? I was sort of just vaguely progressive, because that was the milieu I was in. If you're smart and you go to college, that tends to be who you're around, right? And I just sort of sat there in a dark room and just typed into my phone for hours all of the cognitive dissonance with this worldview that I'd been suppressing. And when I came down from that, I realized that like I had hated J.K. Rowling without ever actually reading her essay. And I read it and I was like, I agree with pretty much every word of this, And so after that, it was a gradual process, detransitioning, right? I stayed happy with my physical form for a while. But I dropped the identity component, right? I was like, I don't care what anybody calls me, right? I am male and I've done these weird things, and that's what it is, right? And then, gradually as I, drifted further and further away from that world and also developed an interest in having kids, I decided to fully detransition and try to recover my fertility, which based on testing has worked. So.
Nice.
And so how long ago was this, and how old were you when you, I guess, like officially detransitioned?
Yeah, so it would have been something like a year ago, I think, when I went off hormones. And then it was this February when I had my implants removed. I'm 31. I started my transition at 26. So something like a year. It was a fuzzy process, but yeah.
Okay. And as a follower of someone with a parasocial relationship with you, since I've watched you without knowing you, I guess within that last year you've gotten engaged also. So it sounds like you've been able to navigate romance and sex basically, and coming to terms with who you are. So you want to walk us through that a little bit?
Sure. So, I did go through a period, sort of in the middle of my transition when my depression was also at its peak, when I did have, the kind of dysphoria that made it difficult to have sex as a man. But, I think my particular brand, when I'm not just like deeply miserably, kind of depressed and down in that hole, I think my brand of AGP is pretty compatible with like a typical heterosexual relationship, right? So like I'm AGAMP, right? I don't have bottom dysphoria. So yeah, it's really it's not that big of a deal. And I think also part of this process for me, and this is maybe a little bit like external to autosexuality, but contributing in my case to decisions, is that because of early life experiences, I had pretty intense like misandry and just kind of dislike of maleness and men. And part of the sort of reorientation process for me has been sort of discovering or inventing or reconciling with a positive view of masculinity. So
yeah, that's something. There's layers there, right? Because a lot of people would probably like to attribute your entire experience to your childhood trauma. But I think this is something that even Ray has talked about too, and he doesn't talk about any history of trauma or anything, that like a big part of him coming to terms with detransition and coming to terms with his autosexuality was trying to reestablish some value in masculinity and what it meant to be a man. But it is probably hard to disentangle what you're referring to as this misandry from the autogynephilia, because I mean, Aaron and I talked to lots of AGPs without that history who hate men, right? It because their sexuality makes it really difficult to value maleness and being a man. They despise they make really good radical feminists because they despise male sexuality, and so that brings out a lot of that discontent within themselves because they despise that part of themselves. And I think for many of them, they experience the sort of ideological detransition. I think this is part of your story too, actually, Hunter. They experience what like kind of piques them and starts their ideological detransition is seeing these other trans women as essentially like misogynistic dogs and being like, this, I don't want anything to do with this. Like if I'm like that actually makes me more dysphoric. I don't want to be associated with that. So it's really interesting. AGP psychology, basically.
That really accurately describes my experience too. Like a big part of what the dissonance that came out in that really intense experience was because I was very involved in the community in the city I lived in at the time. Right, it was the biggest city in like a very, very red state. So the LGBT and community was very tight knit there. So I met a lot of other trans people, and it was just like, gosh, from the androphobia, kind of misandry standpoint, like I kind of thought I was getting away from this, right? I thought I was leaving that clubhouse that I didn't like and going into this other clubhouse. But it turns out that the rules that allow me to do that also allow all these people who, to me, do not feel right. You know what I mean? They don't feel safe. I feel the same weird, creepy, uncomfortable attention from them that I felt from men, and it's very male coded. And like, not only do they also all get to come into the clubhouse behind me now, but I'm not even allowed to notice this or point it out, right? I can't say, you could say an individual person's behavior was bad in an instance, but you weren't allowed to say, and is male coded, right? This is bad in a very male way because this is a male human being, right? And like that just became intolerable to me after a certain point. I did go through kind of a radical feminist phase. I was actually in like a super extremist like TERF group chat for a while as like their pet, like MTF.
That tracks. Really tracks. What do they? I don't know. I'm not like hip on all of the like Blanchardian Reddit subculture lingo, but what is it like? Not like the other girl. There's a whole bunch of different like types, right? And that really tracks. There are always the MTFs or like the sort of gray area detransitioners, like the people who don't really care what you call them, and I'm a male, but I chose to do this with my life, who end up in the radical feminist gender critical movement.
No pet troons. The other half says.
Right, which interestingly creates a divide right there, because that's exactly right. Then what you say about the clubhouse, I agree with you, and I think it's what puts a lot of based transsexuals in a really challenging spot, is because they want to desperately try to figure out a way to gatekeep the clubhouse and to just make better requirements. But I don't see, as someone who cares a lot about, I do care about people's feelings. I was like really a bleeding heart lefty for a long time, but I just don't see literally any possible effective way to do that. There is no way to enforce anything in between sex segregation and self-ID.
Yeah.
Because we don't have brains tests, right? And we don't have cheek
Right.
swabs or anything that can tell us what's going on here. So it's all based on self-report. And no, I don't think everyone's a liar. But once you create specific categories or criteria that you need to meet, then all you have to say is I meet them. All you have to say is I meet these criteria. And so, yeah, I think like cat's out of the bag with medicalization. I don't think we're going to be able to start that anytime or stop that anytime soon. And I don't know that we necessarily need to. But yeah, I also don't see any way to only allow people to transition who really want to integrate into femininity. And by the way, that ignores the fact that there are a lot of people who sincerely want to integrate into femininity and can't.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing, is that like sincerity isn't enough, right? Like there's some people who, you know, I've always gotten along pretty well with women. You know, I think I was relatively unobnoxious, right? When I was trans, I'm sure I had obnoxious moments, but like none of these criteria are compressible into any kind of generalizable standard, right? Like on an individual basis, it can work, right? But that's just what happens naturally, right? Like friend groups form. And, you know, people, you know, the same thing happens with just gay men, right? That often get sort of absorbed into like female friend groups and stuff, right? And that same thing can and always will happen, where people just feel an affinity for each other and will identify that in each other and you know, line up. There's no way to like formalize or systematize this process any better than, you know, real recognizes real, basically. So like, for anything that you know, isn't like a friend group, essentially anything that isn't like deeply personal, then yeah, it should just be sex-based, right?
Where it matters, at least.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
So then you get into the problem with like the people like me and other FTMs. It's a more difficult path there because of the whole, oftentimes sex is segregated for the safety and privacy of females, right? And so this is like it always comes across, and I always feel like I'm being a hypocrite here. But it's like if I go into the space that's designated for females, I'm upsetting that feeling of safety and privacy in that space, and essentially, so it's like there is. Not only do we have to think about like in certain circumstances, this you know, sex matters in this context, or you know, it doesn't matter in this context, but then it also matters which sex are you imitating. It's also relevant in the when we're measuring that all out, because unfortunately the two aren't just interchangeable like that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's one of the things I'm fascinated by, are all the asymmetries between the MTF and experience. But yeah, I mean, like, you know, just personally, like, I don't think it would make much sense for you to use the women's room out of some kind of principle, you know, because you know, I care about outcomes, not principles. And like, you'll make 0 people uncomfortable in the men's room, and like you could potentially make a lot of women uncomfortable if you went in the women's room. So like, what's the point? You know, just because like.
Yeah, I think it's important that people are sort of honest with themselves about how much they actually pass for strangers, you know? So if basically every stranger who looks at you thinks you're male, then it shouldn't be a problem that you're in the men's room, right? Whereas if you go in the women's room and the women are like, wait, what's going on here? Then, you know, I think that's more of a problem.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, like the standard of like, you know, I think the law should be that, you know, to the extent there are laws about these things, right? A lot of it is just private businesses or whatever, but like policy that's written down should be sex-based, and then passing trans people will just do what they're going to do. And like, it's sort of, it's self-enforcing, because if you're right about the fact that you pass, there won't be a problem. And if you're wrong about it, there will be, right?
Exactly. Somebody on Twitter said, and they put it perfectly, it's like, if you need to prove that you belong in that space, you don't belong in that space. Like it's evident there.
Well, and part of the problem is just how many people are have a really hard time actually perceiving themselves and knowing whether they pass or not. And we live in a culture that like hug boxes everyone and just tells them that they're amazing and gorgeous and slay queen. And part of that is also like, there's like a certain truth to like, the longer you're in the gender soup, the harder it kind of becomes. Like you your brain does sort of like, the way sexing people becomes like kind of a weird business. Not that you lose this evolutionary ability, and I think you're able to tune it right back up once you kind of wake up from this stuff. But like, I think a lot of this is friends who like, they're comfortable with it, so they're telling you that it's okay, you know, and they start to see everyone in this sort of presentation first mindset. Those are the same people who start they-theming, like, you know, not even butch lesbians, just like, you know, like Midwestern moms, you know, short haircuts. So but yeah, a lot of people have a really hard time policing themselves. And yeah, it's funny, on the topic of passing transsexuals will continue to do basically whatever they want to do. That makes a lot of people angry. I think I don't want to bring too much attention to this. Not that, I mean, we have a pretty small platform here. I think we have, like, as of today, 262 subscribers. So I'm not so worried about like causing a big scene. But Skylar, who was our most recent guest, she talked about it a little in our conversation, but she also talked about it in her conversation with Phil Illy that was released recently. And she had kind of the ultimate test of this, which is she went to the Gen Spect conference in Denver and used women's restrooms. And no one knew. And again, like, I think, like, I hope this doesn't bring her any backlash. And she said this, so I'm not like outing her in any way. I only know this because she said this publicly. But yeah, like, there is just a reality that, like, it's not and Aaron and I have kind of talked about this. It really is about disruption to the space, because it's not even like so much about harm, right? I won't derail us too much because I've gone down this road, but it's not even so much about the penis, you know, because it's like there are passing trans women, including Skylar, who has a penis, who are able to not disrupt these spaces. And you can't actually know a person's intention when they walk in somewhere, right? But yeah, the problem is a lot of people really don't have they're not good at, like, I don't know if it's they're not good at perceiving themselves or they're just highly optimistic, but yeah, and there are a lot of people who, I guess, are hypocrites in the gender critical space. These are supposed to be the sex realists, you know, the people engaged in reality. And they'll say that people like Aaron should be using the women's restroom on principle. And like, even like she-herring Aaron, it's like, Aaron doesn't care, but I mean, that's effort. You're like, you have to try to do that. And that's a little cringe to me. But okay.
I do put in the effort to misgender people who I really despise.
Yeah, I've done it. I've done that too. Yeah. Anyway.
One of those petty, small satisfactions.
Yeah, it's fair. Sorry, and like, I get it. No, I get it for like rapists, you know, and like the really like abhorrent things. Like, I'm not willing to call certain people. I'm not willing to do that for certain people, but it really has to be pretty egregious. And I'm not even concerned about like making people feel good. Like, I just like, almost a name is enough. We were just talking about this in one of our group chats recently. A name is enough for me to like use certain pronouns, even if the person is extraordinarily clocky. If they have like a feminine name, that like my brain will go there more naturally. Especially online when we're all like talking to different people's avatars and stuff. But okay, so Hunter, you said that your presentation, you think, lends itself nicely to sort of heterosexuality, but you have the added component of like knowing this about yourself. And so, yeah, what's it like being open about that? So yes, you want to engage in a heterosexual relationship, but I assume the dynamics aren't going to be always traditionally heterosexual. Does that make sense what I'm saying? I'm going to lay it out.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I think it's probably, you know, maybe less deviated from the norm than some people might think, right? So like, you know, I have some atypical interests, right? You know, like I like women's fashion, right? I'm super interested in it. You know, I have some affinity for, you know, like interior decoration and those kinds of things. So, you know, there's a sense in which, you know, my relationship has, you know, maybe more of that kind of friendship component, I guess you could say, than like maybe the typical heterosexual relationship, right? I have no interest in like maintaining any kind of macho presentation or concealing my emotions or anything like that. But beyond that, I still do like being kind of a protector. There are aspects of the male typical role that I do like. I like being reliable. I like just trying to make things a little bit easier for my fiance, when I can. So there are parts of it that are pretty typical. And then, sexually, the only real, deviation is that like I might want to cross dress sometimes, but other than that, it's pretty normal, I would say.
Okay. So you feel pretty like comfortable with like the male sex role, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so that really does, I guess, probably simplify it. Did you have any issues, like, even just like bringing up the cross-dressing aspect? I guess like telling people that and then incorporating that in relationships?
So, my fiance was sort of aware of my existence for a lot of my journey. So there was never really a moment of bringing it up exactly. It was just something that was kind of understood. But yeah, I mean, I was kind of the attitude that I was just going to keep these things kind of to myself, which was fine with me. And then she actually brought up of her own volition that like she's like, hey, just so you know, like I know you said you're basically past all this stuff, but like if you are still having some of those feelings, like I super duper don't care. Like, so yeah.
You had actually said on
nice.
On the in your interview with Phil, you were talking about an ex of yours, and then you realize in retrospectively she probably was autoandrophilic. What was like? What were the clues as to that, and like how did that impact your relationship, or was the like kind of symbiotic, or
yeah
any details
so
there?
yeah, my second wife what may have had some autoandrophilia, definitely not to the point where it like was her entire sexuality or like crowded out everything else, but it would come up sometimes. And in general, I think it made things worse, right? Because like I actually like I don't like I like women, like I'm into women. So to the extent that she wanted to sort of inhabit a role that took her further away from that, I think it made things harder for us. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And again, it just sort of speaks to the diversity in presentation and in intensity probably of autogynephilia, because sometimes like we'll joke that autoandrophiles and autogynephiles make the perfect match. And I think to a certain extent they might, for better or for worse, depending on the situation, kind of like feed each other, and like encourage each other. So that's interesting that, and just with like metasexuality, which is kind of really a large part of the basis of this show, is we've found from people that autogynephiles that we know who only act heterosexually, are only interested in women, still find themselves more attracted to like tomboyish women, or women who are in some ways more masculine in demeanor or style than them, in a way that they can, in reference to her, feel feminine.
So I think my experience is a little bit different, and this applies really before and during transition. But for me, I never really felt like it was so much that like I wanted to be with a masculine woman. It was that masculine women wanted to be with me, right? And so that's who showed up. And most of my life, people have just sort of come up to me, either literally or remotely, and just been like, hey, so how about it? And I'm just like, okay, Sure, let's try it. So, I don't think I I don't think I've only been, the pursuer in like a very small number of relationships, including my current one. But yeah, historically, I definitely think it was kind of driven the other way around. And, maybe a lot of them had at least a touch of autoandrophilia. And that's why they preferred me as kind of a, skinnier, like nerdy feminine guy with long hair or something.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's really interesting. That kind of, I guess that, well, I have thoughts about that, but I don't want to ramble too much because it brings me nicely into a question I have for Diane, which is why are women so into you, and why are you so into feminized men?
Sorry, I think I'm.
Oh, no, you are muted.
Sorry. I don't think that women are into me. It was just this. I don't know what her damage is, but there's this one woman on Twitter who I don't even think she was arguing with me. She tells me all the time how ugly I am, and then she posts a bunch of selfies of her in a swimsuit to argue with other people or to call me ugly or something. And I'm like, what? Why am I seeing your saggy breasts and your large derriere in my replies? I did not ask for this. I did not claim I was more attractive than you. I've made no claims about, my appearance or your appearance. Why is this happening to me? Right. So I think that's the post that you noticed about me.
Okay, so maybe
I was like, if somebody's going to be putting selfies in my replies, why can't it be some viciously hot AGP? Why does it have to be, this saggy tits Mexican?
Okay, so how then? How did you, or when did you first realize that you had an affinity for viciously hot AGPs?
So like when I was in high school, I actually even younger than that, like I've become obsessed with just other girls, like just, I don't know, in love with them, obsessed with them, limerence, whatever you want to call it. But I mean, I have tried dating a girl, and I just the parts don't do it for me. Like I don't know what to do with girl parts. I'm not really into those parts. So I was like, well, I think I'm just screwed because I've also, mostly dated guys throughout my life. And it's like, okay, I mean, the physical parts are good, but the brain is kind of lacking. So what do I do with this combination of desires, right? Like I even tried dating a gay guy, and no, honestly, that was one of my favorite relationships ever. But at the end of the day, he's a gay guy, right? So I'm not really doing it for him either. Somebody's always going to be unhappy, right? And then I don't know, within the past year or so, I read Phil Illy's book, and I was like, oh, so there are people who are born male or whatever, but then there's some aspects of them are they're more feminine. They like to look pretty. They keep their face shaven. That one's a big one for me because I hate being scraped on the face when somebody kisses me. It's like, I always tell guys, like, if you don't shave, like, would you kiss a man? No, right? Because you're going to get just scraped all over your face. It's not pleasant. Sandpaper on your face. So like shave, right? But most of the time they're like, oh, I don't want to, I'm lazy, and it sucks. So, rambling. Where was I? So, right.
No,
so this seems to be, this is sort of the perfect, place for me. And throughout college and stuff, I did have this thing where I would tell my boyfriends, like, wear my mini skirts. Like, this is cute. Like, your ass looks better than my ass. Your legs look better than my legs. So why don't you wear my skirt? And they'd be like, what? What's wrong with you? Why do you want me to? And I'm like, don't ask questions. Just wear my skirt and prance around a little bit. It's fun. We don't have to, you don't have to do it in public. We don't have to tell anybody.
It's like you're a fantasy
this.
born from an AGP's feminization fantasy, honestly.
Or like I've encouraged them to just grow out their pretty hair all long. And I had this boyfriend in college who is an exchange student from Germany. and he had blonde hair like past his shoulders, wavy, light blonde, like corn silk, and it was so pretty that his friends back home given him this nickname that basically translates to, you know, like the angel on top of the Christmas tree, right? That was his nickname. And I was like, look, you have this pretty long hair and these great legs, and you might as well just wear my skirts. I mean, it's logical.
Yeah, that is fascinating. And I have a lot more questions, but it's interesting that you say that your like most successful or favorite relationship before it clicked that autogynephiles exist and there might be like people out there who like really fit this description of what you're looking for. It's interesting that your favorite relationship was with a gay man. Now, a lot of people are going to take issue with that statement. I once dated a gay man, and they're going to start screaming, well, then he's not really gay and whatever. I've gone on lots of rants about that, so I'll save that for now. I think those people are super fucking uptight and annoying. But I like autogynephiles, many of them, especially sort of like in the beginning of their transition or kind of pre-transition, will be mistaken for gay. They'll be mistaken for gay men because they have this affinity towards embodying femininity in certain ways, which leads to what like Aaron and I see as a lot of like the false messaging of the gender critical movement is that all of these guys are like dealing with internalized homophobia and they're just like autistic gay boys who are, you know, being trapped by the culture. But so they're and then there's the other gender criticals who want to say that actually autogynephiles are the most macho masculine of all the men, right? So that when they see someone like Hunter, it's like, well, that's again, it's like Hunter, no, that's some metrosexual gay boy or something, and it doesn't click for them. They really can't understand it, I guess. But so it's fascinating that that your most successful relationship or one that you were the most into was with I'm assuming somewhat feminine man.
Yeah, but he was great. I mean, it was in high school though, so we can just call it like his experimental phase. I was like, you never tried dating a girl. You just try it. I mean, it's no harm, no foul. We're in high school. Who cares, right? He was like, okay, I'll try it. And it was fantastic. So great. He liked to go shopping with me and he would critique my outfits and wonderful. Anyway.
And did he want to wear your outfits though? I think that's what Tali's getting at.
He didn't have any interest in wearing my outfits. Although I did sometimes just tell him to, and he'd do it because, you know, he was accommodating.
This is what I mean. I mean, like I hear these stories, like it sounds like, you know, these either transition or detransition autogynephiles talking about how, you know, this girlfriend, you know, made them dress up like this, and I think it's totally a fantasy that they've concocted. It's like, nope, they were just dating Diane or somebody else.
It's me. It's my fault that some of these autogynephiles exist. You know, they probably weren't even thinking about why would I wear women's clothes, and then they put it on and they're like, oh no, she's right. This is hot, right? It's like my fault. Actually, I'm sorry. I'm the one who's like, creating this.
People think porn. People think porn is the trigger, but it's Diane.
It's me.
Yeah. So, okay, so this is interesting, and this kind of to go back to what Hunter was saying before, and there's a conversation that. Or maybe a sort of a debate that takes place amongst people who are interested in this stuff about GAMPs, people who are attracted to the sort of male-female morph, basically. People who are into trans women, traps, as they are colloquially called. And some people are concerned with are traps gay. I think that is like, that's 101 level. Those people are, you know, not really interesting. No, traps are not gay. But the more interesting question is, are all GAMPs AGP? Basically, like, are GAMP and AGP part of the same experience and sort of different presentations? Because there seems to be in I guess the few studies that have looked into this, that there's high endorsement, relatively high endorsement of AGP features among people who report attraction to gynandromorphs, right? To trans women, to she-males and stuff like that. And so I think, and from what we have found anecdotally of the few chasers that we've come into contact with, the few women who self-report like being particularly interested in autogynephiles, like that being their preference in male partners, some of them seem to be autoandrophilic or identify that way. But I'm not convinced, I guess, that these things are one and the same, basically, at just presenting at different levels. And so I think Aaron and I are both curious, like if you have any autoandrophilic tendencies, feelings, anything like that. You read Phil's book, so I guess you have some familiarity with it. Does any of that resonate with you?
Me, I mean, none of it is sexual, but I mean, I did like the idea. So my major in college, one of my majors is math, and so I have always really liked being one of the guys or kind of accepted into male spaces, especially if there are sort of intellectual spaces. I mean, I have no interest in like their sports or their gyms or physical spaces like that. But, you know, if it's like, if math T and we're all chatting about number theory, it feels good, really good to me to be, you know, like one of the boys in that context. And I do wear clothes that, I mean, wouldn't look out of place on a guy. But that's just because it's really cold and, you know, San Francisco is a cold place. I'm very weak. And there is one thing I'm not like turned on by looking male, but I am really disgusted with myself if I look too stereotypically like feminine, sexy. Like if at some point my breasts were larger because I was fatter, and I was like, no, this absolutely won't do. And I made myself lose like 30 pounds because I didn't want, it just looked pornographic to me, right? I looked in the mirror and I'd be like, this is gross. I cannot look like this. It's inappropriate. So no, I don't think I have autoandrophilia, but I definitely do not like looking like a woman. Oh, some of my the people on Twitter, then they try to insult me. They're like, you have the body of a 12-year-old boy. And I was like, oh, thank you. I really wish that were true. That would be wonderful.
Yeah. See, Diane, that's pretty AAP. And again, like this is not gonna look good for Aaron and I, because people have been calling us groomers. So us here trying to tell you that you're somewhere on the AAP spectrum, it's not gonna help. It's not gonna help our case. But that's super interesting that you had that exchange, and it reminds me of an exchange that Hunter recently had on Twitter, where you posted that like people, their first insult for you, like lefties, they'll call you gay. And I commented like, they don't understand that is like, that's gender affirmation right there. Like, oh, you look like, you know, like, whatever, pretty skinny Twinkie, whatever, like, nice. I'm doing something right then.
No, they're so terrible with this. I get these things all the time, and it never stops being funny to me, where they'll be like, is that a gay guy or a lesbian? And I'm like, thank you so much. right what I'm aiming for.
Yeah.
No, it's great. They're like, I can't tell if that's like a kind of butch lesbian or a very feminine gay guy. And it's like,
yeah.
Right,
so like, that's my gender, actually.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but on Twitter, I get asked almost every day if I'm trans. Like,
wow.
At this point, I think they're fantasizing about my imaginary girl dick. They're like really upset. There's some people who ask me almost every day on completely unrelated posts, like, but Diane, are you trans? Like, your jawline. I don't know. There's something male about you. You're really a man, right? Like, you have a penis. You know, they're just really just fixated on the idea of
I can't believe they're going with the jawline. I would say, like, I think you are well, I think, like, back to how I introduced you guys, like, I think you're autistic, basically. And I'm sorry, like, I overuse that word too, so sorry if you don't identify that way, but like, I think you come across as quote unquote male brained. Those are terms that like the trans and AGP people love to use those terms, but I could see that you coming across male brained, but I don't think you look like a man at all, so that's pretty crazy. I was recently called a troon, so maybe we'll just wear it together as a badge of honor.
Now everyone's under suspicion, right? Like when the technology gets too good and the AGP are too feminine and attractive, then we fall below the bar, and it's like we're all suspects now.
Yeah,
no one can tell anymore.
Yeah.
As somebody who, got facial feminization surgery and so has spent plenty of time obsessing over sex differentiated facial features, there's nothing there. They're just making up. This is all wishful thinking. Like,
yeah.
Sorry, Diane.
Yeah.
I mean, and Asians are not that sexually dimorphic to begin with, so I don't know what. At this point, I think it just must be a fantasy. They're hoping one day I'll be like, yeah, that's me. I do have, what you're hoping I have.
Well, so this brings me to maybe a more explicit question. So, so you talked about emotionally and sort of personality wise, why like seeking an autogynephile would work for you, basically. Do you find yourself particularly attracted to, I guess I'll put like effeminate males on one hand, but I guess like she-male, basically. Like, would you actually qualify as GAMP is what I'm curious about. Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah,
like I find like so there was do you find Alex Consani? She just won the model of the year.
Yeah.
Well, I find that's like the ideal look of a human being to be. Like, if I could look that way, fantastic. If I could date somebody that looks that way, fantastic. Like, this is, the ideal of the human form is just like a sort of feminine beauty, like facially and stuff, and then more or less a male body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating. And so is now, again, I'm going to get graphic again. Obviously, you can refuse any of these questions. So when you say a male body, like, is the penis pretty important there? Because we had a previous guest on, who was in a relationship with an autogynephilic trans woman, and she was like kind of talking about how she's really anxious that her girlfriend, as she calls her, right, like wants bottom surgery, and she knows that that's going to be like a big problem for her in attraction and sex and stuff. So okay, so it's like okay.
Yeah, I mean, so like when I tried dating girls, there were girls that I was obsessed with. We didn't know what to do with the parts, girl on girl parts. We were like, well, we're just gonna have to hire a household penis, and he will come and do, the penis things to both of us while we look into each other's eyes or whatever. This was high school. Forgive us, right? Mm-hmm. Like, we didn't know what it is that women do with each other's parts, and me, I was never interested enough to find out. So I was like, I could be emotionally involved with a woman and just be kind of celibate, fine. But, it'd be nice if like there was the right parts as well. So this seems to be the, Sorry, go ahead.
Where do you think this attraction, you said you became obsessed with girls in high school and you had, at least one girlfriend, it sounds like. Where did that come from if you weren't sexually attracted to their bodies?
Yeah, it wasn't ever their bodies. I'm super picky about guys. I'm like a total bitch about what guys look like. I require them to be basically like just perfect looking, But with women, I was like, whatever. What I love about you is you as a person. I love your mind. I love your
That's
soul.
gay, Diane.
I know, right? It's extremely gay. But when it comes to men, it's like, no, you have to be absolute perfection. You have to be an Adonis. I have to be able to see every rib, every bone in your spine. I want to see your xylophone. You know, like, I'm a total bitch when it comes to guys in appearance because, like, you know, they don't have all the other stuff to make up for it, right? So,
what stuff? I guess, yeah. I'm curious where this attraction, like, what is the root of the attraction to women?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't explain that. It's more of a spiritual mind, soul, heart thing than it is like a physical thing, I guess. I can't explain it. That just happens to have been like how I felt about the various women that I've been obsessed with, as opposed to the guys that I've dated, where it's just like, oh, okay, you know, I guess this will do. Yeah. You like me, and I'm not doing anything else right now, so sure.
But now looking back and realizing you were in high school, etc., was it you know, 'cause for women, you know, like for females, you know, sexuality often sets in, you know, late teens, early 20s more. You actually start to. That's my experience. I know Tali and other people we've talked to, you guys, you know, kind of had a more male typical, I'd say, you know, like
I
right
was
at
an
puberty,
early
getting
bloomer.
sexual.
Yeah.
But I think for a lot of women, it's just like it gets progressively more intense, like probably leveling out about early 20s, maybe mid 20s. But I don't think for many women, many girls, it's like, boom, I'm 14 and can think about nothing but sex. I don't think that's common. And I'm wondering, like, what was your, like, do you think that what you were like thinking was attraction to girls in high school, was it maybe more like a platonic obsession or something? Like, was it actually what you like? Obviously, when you're talking about attraction to guys, you're very much talking about their bodies, you know what it is you're attracted to. But with girls, like, are you sure that was even sexual attraction, or was it just like a platonic obsession?
I guess if that's a really interesting question, because no, you're right. It was never that sexual. It's not like I want to touch your parts or I want to, you know, grab your breasts or anything like that. It was like, if I never get to touch you, that's okay. Like, I would be happy just to see you every day for the rest of my life and never get to touch or talk to you, happier than I would with like an entire marriage for the rest of my life with a man. You know, it was romantic. It was very romantic, but it was not like, you know, let me touch you in the parts kind of sexual. I don't know. Does that make sense? Maybe it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense. Yeah, I'm not sure I understand. Tali might have a good clarifying question.
No. Well, okay. I don't know that I do. I guess what's coming up for me is I find that very interesting, especially with like how I perceive you now as an adult, which is the only frame of reference I have, which is like when we're talking about like sexual dimorphism and things like this, like and you liking to be one of the guys in an intellectual manner. I can like relate to that in some ways. I guess it's interesting for me to hear you describe women as like the ultimate. I know I'm not being clear here. Like, I think like I had a feminist phase certainly, and part of my like I'm married to a woman, by the way. Part of my like waking up to my attraction to women was partly feminist, not in a man-hating way, but I remember this like literally just like, wow, women are incredible. Like women are just like make the world go round, and like, and I really and I did think they were like better than men in many ways. I don't believe that anymore. But so that's like that just feels very. I'm stumbling here with my words, but so it's
no, you're right. It does sound like kind of a contradiction, right? Like I want to be in the boys' club and accepted by the guys, but then when I've had these sort of soul-shaking obsessions, it's been with women. I can't explain it. I personally cannot explain it. I don't know what that's all about. Maybe it's because like what I have seen from men or like how they respond to me is mostly, you know, like a sexual thing. And it just feels, it feels sort of surface level and cheap to me. That's all.
I'm sorry. I'm going to continue to groom you here. Is it possible that it's meta? That what you were experiencing was meta attraction, like an appreciation of their femininity as like a way to be like the pure male, like to like you're talking about not appreciating like being kind of objectified, let's say, by men. Were you like? I'm wondering if it was a kind of a case of being like thinking of yourself as a man appreciating their feminine beauty and intellect in like a noble way that you think you should be appreciated.
Yeah, maybe that's it. No, I've never really thought of it from that perspective, but maybe that is it, because like I have always sort of idealized. Are you familiar with the backstory of the Italian poet Dante Alighieri and his muse Beatrice? No, probably not. But, I mean, he caught a glimpse of her one time when they were both 12 or something like that. And like basically the bulk of his poetic work was based on just seeing her in the marketplace for 2 seconds one time. And that, you know, that to me is sort of like peak romance. And I've always been really moved by that story. And that's kind of how I think that things should be. And, you know, he ended up married to somebody else. Nothing ever happened between the two of them, but somehow just like seeing her so enraptured his soul that it basically, you know, inspired him to produce the bulk of his poetic works, which are to this day still, you know, so famous. And
I think that's fascinating, and that was an interesting question that you asked, Aaron. Like, right, is it like did it feel like your appreciation for women is like how men should appreciate
you were
women
being
almost?
Dante?
Like, yeah, like the pure.
Maybe that's it.
Yeah.
That's the ideal. That's the ideal.
Dude, I'm so good at agreement.
Excellent.
No, well, that's really interesting because, like, I think about what would ever even drive you, I guess, to like test it out with women, basically. I guess that's like maybe part of what I was getting at is like what attracted you to women. And, you know, everyone loves to talk about like compet, right? And like as if everyone's just like being forced to be straight or something. And obviously I think that's like really ridiculous cope. But I don't think like everyone is like testing out being with, you know, I don't think everyone has a gay phase or a bi phase or anything close to that. So it is interesting that you like felt drawn at a relatively early age to like experiment in that way. And I guess like again, I'm like really conscious of the fact that I don't care how you identify or how you conceptualize yourself. But part of like Aaron and I's conceptualization of the kind of like butch lesbian to gay trans man pipeline is that female sexuality is more malleable, is more fluid in a lot of ways than male sexuality. And so we've sort of like hypothesized that someone who way more extreme than you, Diane, someone who really like has an affinity for masculinity or whatever, like could find themselves dating women in a way that would not be as hard, let's say, as like a man, a straight man trying to date men or something. Like it could just kind of, I don't know, we feel like it would be like a natural thing to test out basically, or like a clear path for them to go down if they wanted to sort of be the masculine one. It's like a way to embody masculinity in a culturally acceptable fashion. Yeah, so I just think it's interesting that you like had no real sexual attraction to women, but how old are you?
Let's not go there. I'm pretty old.
Okay, so you're not like Gen Z or
I don't even know what the delineations are there, but yeah, I'm quite old.
Okay, I'm sure you're not that old, but okay. So yeah, like I asked that because I was gonna make the caveat of like the young people are really obsessed with like being sexual minorities, so there probably is more experimentation or even faux experimentation going on right now. But yeah, like I'm someone who is like, I'm sexually attracted to women, and I didn't try dating women young. I would like kiss girls, you know, and like I have like one memory of like sneaking off behind the like sneaking away from a party and like making out with a girl in like 10th grade and us never really talking about it again. But like I didn't feel at all compelled to like try to date girls or anything like that. So I do think it is just interesting that you kind of went that route.
Wait, where did you grow up? I think this might be relevant.
New York.
Ah, okay. Maybe it's not relevant then. Because I grew up in San Francisco, right? So
yeah,
it's not even, you don't even need to really come out when you grow up in San Francisco. It's kind of like, oh, you know, if you tell somebody, oh, actually I'm gay, it's like, so what? That's like telling somebody your favorite color is blue. We don't care. You know, it's cool.
Yeah.
Right. So it was not even, there's not really a big psychic barrier, I guess, between just dating and then dating somebody of the same sex. If that makes sense. Like there's not like an extra hurdle or anything. Or I didn't feel that there was. It was just very whatever.
Okay, and do you have any interest in like in taking on a masculine role? I guess in any way. I'm curious sexually, but like even just like interpersonally, like how do you like to be in a relationship? And
oh yeah, there's a lot of joking about how I wear the pants, and there's a lot of joking about things like that. And that has been the case in a lot of my relationships, but probably because I've dated guys who are just used to, I don't know, they're kind of sheltered, or their moms do everything or whatever, you know. There's a story I tell about how I was in Italy with an ex-boyfriend, and we were about to be late for the train. We had like 2 minutes, and he instead of, trying to figure out where our train was going to be leaving from, he just sat down and started crying. I was like, no. We're going to find our train. You can cry on the train. Now let's go. Right? Like, so I just kind of just started running in a direction and asking whoever, hey, do you know, where is the train to Firenze or whatever. But I mean, that's the kind of thing that I'd often find myself in. And so I just be like, okay, you can't, I'm not even going to assume that you know how to do anything. So I guess I'm in charge.
Always in a way that you're resentful of, or no?
It's not even a resentfulness. It's just like this has to happen this way, or else we're both just going to miss the train and be crying on the floor. It's just practicality, right?
Yeah.
I think you get used to a role that you have to embody. So, yeah, that's happened a lot to me. But I mean, I guess I'm also kind of like, they call it a strong personality to be nice. So if somebody is like of a slightly less strong personality, then they kind of just get bowled over, I guess. Sorry, everyone.
I get that. I've been told my whole life that I have a strong personality. Yeah.
So if you call that masculine, then yeah, I guess maybe that's a masculine role. I don't know. Or it could just be like, that Asian dragon lady stereotype, whatever.
That's so interesting. And I guess it kind of just like we don't need to make too much of it, because it kind of like relates, I guess, to the way that I see you presenting yourself and the way that I characterized you earlier, which is like sort of male-brained, and just kind of like logical and matter of fact. So yeah, that tracks. And okay, how about sexually at all? Like, do you like are on a scale from like vanilla to pegging your partner?
Wait, that's the other end of vanilla. That's the other end of the.
Well, it is on the scale if I'm trying to assess. Well, no, I guess it's not. You're right. I guess pegging your partner. Okay. I'm trying to assess basically in terms of like your role, right? Oh. So in terms of like missionary bottom to pegging your partner. Maybe those are the two extremes that I'm trying to put on this spectrum here.
I am extremely boring in bed. Like, I am the most vanilla of the vanillas. I don't own paraphernalia. I don't have any parts with which to put into other people. I don't have anything like that. And I wouldn't know what to do with things like that if I did have them. So yeah, but I think that there are a lot of people on Twitter who wish that I either had a real one or a fake one that I could peg them with. I'm sorry, I don't. I wouldn't even know how to. Apologies. There are plenty of like real AGP that, I don't know, maybe you could talk them into it for enough money.
No, see, and that's really interesting. That's really interesting. And I guess that kind of gets at my question before, or like the debate that I was talking about before of whether like GAMP and AGP are like intrinsically related. And I think because there's I guess I'm like curious at what the connection between like personal disposition and what you're most aroused by. And I don't just mean you in particular, but like there's the somewhat obvious connection of like a GAMP, someone who's into pre-op trans women who might want to be penetrated by their partner, right? Or like might, like the being able to take on a receptive role in some way is part of the appeal. And so I'm wondering if like for a woman, and I know for some women chasers that part of the appeal is being able to take on the dominant role. So it's interesting when those two things aren't present, I guess. Like it's interesting to just have that like pretty clear erotic preference, visually, aesthetically, but not really an internal drive to dominate or something like that.
Yeah, no, I don't have any desire to like take on the male role in the bedroom or anything like that. And I actually like it. If I'm dating a guy and he's prettier than me, I'm into it. I don't know, like probably would make most women kind of weird or insecure or just they wouldn't like it, but I really like it because who am I looking at the most? Like I'm not looking at myself. I don't need to be pretty, right?
So something that you said that just like screams autosexual to me in whatever way that is. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's like autoandrophilia or something like that. But as you said, like, I would really like to look like for my partner to look like that or for me to look like that. And I think that it's those two things coming together is atypical. Like
really?
most people don't think about wanting to look like what they're attracted to. That seems like that, that's very much a process in autogynephilia, the envy, desire cliche, right? It's like I want to be with this person and I want to be like this person. And even like talking to some autosexuals or to some people who I've thought might be autosexual who like can't see it from any other framework. They're like, of course I would want to look like what I'm attracted to. Which to me, like, I don't think that's a very typical, typical process. Yeah.
Because like, if you think something is attractive, wouldn't you want to be attractive? I don't know. It makes sense to me in my mind.
It makes sense to all autists.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and I think what you're saying is like obviously true in like I like that hairstyle and so I'm gonna try to emulate it way. Like they're like, oh, that fashion looks good, so I want to try on that fashion. So yes, I think like in a very obvious way what you're saying is intuitively just true. Yeah, like we think things look good and we want to look good. And so that's the part that I think is true for everyone, and it's some of the pushback that people who kind of reject the autosexual framing will say is like everyone wants to look good, everyone wants to feel sexy, which I think is true, but I don't think that attraction to others and the way you feel like you should look or want to present yourself, I don't think that I guess it's the attraction part, which is different from like admiring something or thinking something looks good and therefore wanting to emulate it. I think that's different from the attraction to something. I don't know how
I think for myself, like if I did look like this ideal of human beauty, I don't know. I don't think I would like turn myself on though. I don't know. I've just never had that feeling. I've never looked in the mirror and been like, oh, I'm hot. It doesn't work like that for me. I don't know.
Right, and again, sorry, I'm just gonna keep sounding like a groomer here, but it's never worked like that for me either. Like
oh,
it's
okay,
just like
okay.
I like to look like what. Yeah, no, it's like it makes me happy to like, but not. It's not like a turn on thing. It's just I think in most females it's sub erotic joy essentially is what I suspect. I think the only reason AGP is understood to be like a specifically sexual thing is because involuntary erections. And like without, that, and everybody just chalks it up to being like this, this purely sexual experience because, males have that wiring that just, but yeah, I think for a lot of people, autosexuality is going to work just like normal, just like an external, attraction. Is like seeing someone you're attracted to doesn't, cause you arousal, but you anyway. I think this framing of autosexuality, meaning that you turn yourself on, is only for people fortunate. Again, it definitely happens to some males and Tali and whatnot. But like, I just it's I think for most, it's going to be sub erotic, but still it's rooted in sexuality.
Oh, so I've been taking it too literally. Okay.
I think a lot of people do, and the thing is also like for some people it is obviously and explicitly erotic. Like that component is there, but yeah, for some people it shows up basically like Aaron said in like unexpected erections, right? So it's like they don't necessarily want it to be sexual, but the sexual component exists. But yeah, I think just like I remember when talking to my wife about like if she had ever like really been into men and stuff like that. And she describes like this feeling of like, well, it's like when I'd be attracted to a guy, like I couldn't really tell if I was like into him or wanted to be him. And I think that's something that autosexuals don't experience, basically. Not that people don't experience jealousy, but especially for someone like heterosexual or something like that, to feel that like, that I don't think that's a typical experience. I do think that is this unifying experience for the autosexuals. Is like, I'm attracted to that thing, and I wish I could be that thing. Not even be what would be attractive to that thing, right? Like maybe a normal heterosexual thing is like, oh, I'm really attracted to this guy, and so I want to be what he would be attracted to. Mm-hmm. Whereas it's like, oh, I'm attracted to this guy, and I also want to look like that, even if that would come at the cost of being able to be with that guy, which is the competing heterosexuality aspect of like that Phil talked about really recently, I think in really easy terms to understand, which is like he's into women and he knows that him being tall and muscular helps him get women, and he feels sad about being tall and muscular because he would much prefer to look like the women that he's attracted to. So yeah, I just thought that was really interesting. I don't want to make too much of you saying that, but that's a really interesting thing that you said, in my opinion.
I'm going to throw a curveball in here, actually, in that, like, for me, I do not experience like an identity between like what I'm most attracted to the idea of being and what I'm most attracted to in other people, actually. So like, I'm a GAMP, right? But I'm not GAMP, right? I don't want to be with like another person with the body type that I want, right? Like what I'm attracted to externally is just like women, right? Like normal women. And so it's just interesting to me that like those aren't the same, right? Like it was kind of hard to tease this out for a while because like, I'd look at the body form and I'd be like, this is cool, but like I really only just want to be that, right? I wouldn't want to be in a relationship with another person like me or anything.
That makes a lot of sense. That is really interesting, and it goes to this like sort of auto-allo distinction, and some people who, like you were saying, where it kind of takes over their entire sexuality, as opposed to other people where autosexuality is part of their sexuality. So that does make sense to me, that like that's, you find like AGAMP, the she-male, is like very attractive in terms of how you would like to look, but it's not something that you're interested in being with, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And like this is just, this obviously is not any kind of like official scientific term, but I kind of feel like I'm like AGAMP, in that like additionally to like normal AGAMP, like the idea of thinking like, oh, I'm so much of that thing is like an extra layer of excitement for me. Like I'm like, oh yeah, what a weirdo, yeah, it's like there's this weird feedback process for like my arousal, kind of in general, but also specifically to do with like AGAMP, where like the fact that I'm excited by these things is itself like additionally exciting. I don't know how to explain it like better than that, but like it's just like the like something about like the
meta sexuality.
Yeah.
Wait, is it infinite? Can you make it infinite via induction?
I think I usually come before it gets to infinity. But yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's like that mirror, right? The never-ending mirror thing. It's like
no, and that's something I think about a lot. Also, just because like I'm really fascinated by like philosophy of mind and stuff, and I'm a big fan of Douglas Hofstadter's book Gödel, Escher, Bach, which basically presents a model of like the sense of self based on this technical notion of like computational self-referentiality. So like I think it's really cool that like this is something I find very intellectually interesting, and also I have like the world's most self-referential sexuality.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
I'm wondering if that self-referential aspect is, because I'm always curious, like what is the difference between AGP and AGAMP, and I wonder if it is that self-referentiality that stops one from actually having like the anatomic dysphoria that comes with AGP and just being, satisfied with the, with the AGAMP situation. And I wonder if it is that self-referential bedrock, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. The thing is also, I know this is, kind of not the, the sexology consensus position, but the way it feels to me has changed drastically over time, right? Like I did used to have like really severe dysphoria in general, right? Crippling anxiety about it. Didn't want to have sex like as a guy, like, and all these feelings were like super duper intense. And since I changed how I thought about it, they're just not anymore, right? Like which parts of the sort of AGP buffet are like most dominant in my consciousness has completely changed, right? Like the overall intensity of it has dropped to almost nothing, right? I don't really experience anything that I think could be called dysphoria, right? I can like look in the mirror, wearing like, just like men's type of suit or something, and I'll just be like, yeah, I look really good, in like a totally non, autosexual way. And like it really felt like this thing, right? This thing in me that, probably doesn't have to be very big and can just occupy the same role in my life as like any other kink would, right? It's like someone's like, oh, I'm really into latex or something, right? People don't make this their identities. It doesn't take over their entire life, right? But like
some people do, but it goes to show that actually, right, that you don't need to. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And like, so for me, I feel like when I paid a lot of attention to this thing and narrativized it in a certain way, it was like watering the plant from Little Shop of Horrors, right? Feeding it the blood. And like, it got bigger and bigger, and it dominated my consciousness. It was like probably 1 out of 3 thoughts I had were, about this thing, took over my life, made me super like anxious and miserable all the time. And, nothing was ever good enough. And then at some point, like I just kind of decided to stop. Right. And like, as soon as I stopped conceptualizing it as like, I'm supposed to be a woman and I'm failing at that in all these ways. And I was just like, no, it's just a kink. Right. But that reconceptualization completely like neutered its ability to like inflict any kind of like suffering on me. And now I really do just see it as like, just a weird quirk that, almost nobody it's not going to influence how almost anybody interacts with me. And like, it's just like being left-handed or something. Like it's a very small thing. So like this idea that like, AGP, like autosexual dysphoria cannot be treated, in any way except by a transition, or that, or that the other sort of no true Scotsman thing people try to do once, that doesn't work, is like, oh, it must not have ever been that bad for you. It's like, it really was, right? Like my dysphoria was like incredibly intense, right? I had surgery done in Mexico on the bones in my face, right? You don't do that if like it's a casual thing for you, right? So no, I really did have like crippling intense, the most true trans, dysphoria or whatever. And now I don't, right? And so like I think that like that's something that's definitely underexplored. And that, I
want to say well, like so I totally agree with you. I was just going to say how there's so much right that the gender criticals are getting about the Rajni boy concept, except it's just that they're not really understanding what it is that's happening. And what you just described is when you have this little inkling of autogynephilic sexuality met with this narrative, and then you ruminate and stew, and it becomes this all-encompassing horrible thing when it could have just been conceptualized as something not so terrible. But I'm wondering what you just said about how you had the surgery on your face in Mexico, and dysphoria brought you to that, and you're saying you don't have dysphoria now, but earlier you said that you love that people like basically say, I don't know if you're a butch lesbian or a femme gay man. And isn't a lot of that to do with the fact that you had this surgery that androgenized you to a certain degree and made you more like maybe less dysphoric about? I'm not selling this transition here, but I'm saying like you were saying earlier how much you enjoy that. And I mean, I can stand here and say I don't have dysphoria anymore, but that's because I look like this. So
yeah, that's fair. I would say that like I don't regret my FFS. It wasn't that drastic, right? If you saw pictures of me before, it wouldn't have been like some like crazy huge change or anything. But like, yeah, I mean, I don't regret that, but it's also not the case that like I only feel comfortable to the extent that I'm like sexually ambiguous or seen as female, right? Like I also think I look better, again, as I said, like wearing a suit, boots unambiguously, like male presenting or whatever, right? Like so yeah, like I am happy to be sort of more like elfin, I guess. But it doesn't really feel like it's because I need to be seen as female, I guess. Like so, I don't know how to parse all that out, but like, yeah, I mean, I do think it's funny. I do get a kick out of confusing people, but I don't get any like I don't experience any negative emotions in the vast majority of circumstances where I don't confuse anybody, right? Like, it's just, especially in person, right? Like nobody's like, uncertain about my sex in real life when I go to the store or something. And like, I never think about it. And really
fair. Yeah.
That's one of the best things about detransitioning for me was just the fact that like, I would say that like at my, sort of at my best, right? I passed maybe like 80-ish, 85% of the time, right? With like full makeup and like very obvious, breasts and everything. But like I was still thinking about it all the time, right? And like every single interaction got passed through that filter, right? Is I'm just like, what is this person thinking about me? What is this person thinking about me, right? And like that was just so noisy. It was just a source of constant anxiety. And it's just like, if anyone notices, then suddenly I'm like being a weirdo or something, right? As opposed to like, I'm just as normal before they notice. And it's just constant noise about what other people are thinking about me. And like, I don't like most people, right? I don't want to be thinking about what they're thinking about, right? I don't care, right? I don't find the vast majority of people remotely interesting. So like the fact that this caused me to allocate so much mental effort to thinking about what other people are thinking about was like that was probably the worst part of the entire experience. Yeah. And it's such a relief now to not be trying to sell anything. You know what I mean? To not have the need for other people to like participate in like my identity. right? It's just, I just am what I am. And I never have to think about what anyone's, thinking about me anymore. It's great.
Yeah, I have so many thoughts about this. I think I'll start with where Aaron started, because I knew that was coming, and I was going to bring that up too, as like what I know is going to be a response to you saying this. Is a lot of AGPs will hear someone like you say that your dysphoria is lessened now. They'll hear someone like Ray, right? People who have detransitioned, people who call themselves autogynephilic, and say that like they're doing okay as men. It makes a lot of AGPs who are invested in transition frustrated, angry. They feel like they'll say things like Aaron said, which I think there is very much validity to. Yes, you look more feminine. Like you said, I don't know what you looked like before your surgery, but like those things could help, could play a role in why you are more comfortable now. But I think
Hunter and Ray are also both AGAMP, and so that's right. That's also a big, like, that's the lottery of AGP, right? Like, it's so much easier than
Yes.
The
But correct. And they both say that, and so it's like people will get really uptight about like, oh, this is not how it is for all AGPs. Like, sure, this is not how it is for all AGPs, but I think there is something to be said for what you're saying, Hunter, about like rumination and mental health. Like what I was thinking before Aaron came in was like, my mental health significantly improved from unwoking, basically. Like when I realized that all of my politics and my entire worldview was retarded, I'm no longer on antidepressants. I mean, literally, like I like stopped taking antidepressants. Like I'm just much healthier. I'm fatter, but that was COVID really too. But I'm so much mentally healthier. It's incredible. Like it's truly incredible. How much what we put our attention on, right, can really influence our feelings, and the role that rumination plays and paranoia plays in the transition process. And Hunter and Diane, I don't know if you guys know, but my wife is a dysphoric woman, and she was like briefly started a social transition, and then I peaked and then kind of walked her back from that, and like whatever. But I remember one of the really impactful things, as I see it at least, and sort of like the breaking the spell and kind of bringing her to desisting or whatever, to going back to just like not caring about this shit, was saying to her, like, what kind of life is it to live being so worried that someone's gonna like actually see you, like that someone's gonna get it right about your sex? Like that's miserable. That's miserable to be walking around, like you said, caring so much about all these other people, but just like hiding something like that. And I think that's got to be a weight that a lot of even well-adjusted trans people carry. And this came up in our last conversation with Skylar about an interaction she had in the men's room as a trans woman, with a man clocking her as a woman and asking her to leave. And I was saying to her how, like in her retelling of the story, it didn't seem like this guy was going to hurt her. Like, I don't think that she was in any physical danger at all. But I realized, like, but I'm not lying about my sex. So like, if I had an interaction like that, I have no fear of being found out. Like, I don't have that extra layer and that other baggage that is obviously heavy. So like, do I think that everyone can cure their autogynephilia? No, but also you're not saying you cured your autogynephilia. And I really do think there is truth in like how much we pay attention to things. And yeah, world mindset can change a lot of things materially. Not in like a woo-woo sense, right? But
yeah, through normal causal pathways. Yeah, no, I really do think that, like, and for people familiar with my with my presence on X, formerly Twitter, like I spend a lot of time talking about all the aspects of like our psychology and our mental traits that are basically set and immutable. And, I spend a lot of time on that because I feel like, that the sort of dominant narrative in our society has gone so far in the other direction towards like, total rewritability. People are empty hard drives, that it's important to push that point. So, maybe some of those people will be surprised to hear me say this, but I also think a lot of people underestimate how mutable certain aspects of our psychology are. And yeah, I mean, there's that famous machine learning paper, attention is all you need, right? And like what you pay attention to is really does make a big difference. It really does. And like the tendency to ruminate, neuroticism is probably innate, but that doesn't mean that like you can't do anything about those tendencies. You can't develop ways to distract yourself. And it also doesn't say anything about the content of what you're ruminating on. Right. So like, maybe you are someone who is going to ruminate, but there's some control there over like what the subject of your rumination is. And if you choose to, or if you, sort of fall into and can't find your way out of ruminating on something that causes you a tremendous amount of pain and causes you to make decisions that might, upend your life, right? You're ruminating on this thing and suddenly, the classic horror, like trans widow case, you like break up your family and your 3 kids and everything, right? And like, it doesn't happen every time, but it does happen. And like in those kinds of situations, right? I really wish that people, and GCs, most of the GCs aren't going to do this because like they just refuse to take any kind of compassionate tone, and like they've I understand why, like there are real horror stories out there, but like they've become so lost in like this like egregiously intense like moralistic frame that they're not pragmatic. You know what I mean? They're not thinking about like what's the least action path to get to the results that we all want, right? The better, more well-adjusted world that we all want. It's not about that. It's like they've become like these like really extreme like deontologists about the whole thing, right? It's not about what works, it's about the rules, right? And like that's not an effect that, it's like these people are evil and we have to hate them and we will tolerate no other messaging. And like that's not going to stop the guy with 3 kids from breaking up his family. It never will, because he'll tune them out immediately, right? That's gone from his head, right? And I really wish, part of why I do shows like this, why I talk about this, even though like, based on the audience I sort of accrue from my other content, it's sort of dissonant to, to do this like sort of high openness, like, sexuality talk. I do it anyway because I want to reach that guy, right? I want to reach that guy and tell him that like what you're feeling is, natural. It's probably to a large extent, the tendency is innate, but I promise you that like, it doesn't have to feel like a coke addiction, right? It doesn't have to be this like giant, terrible thing that you either have to like crush under a Bible or let devour your entire life, right? You can just look at this thing openly and honestly and see that it's not huge. It's not like a dark, horrible secret. It's a small thing, right? You can just look at this thing and just see it as small, right? It's just like, I have this weird little quirk where this, this subset of things like has this like strange emotional appeal to me or turns me on or whatever. And you can just be like, okay. And you can just see that and accept it about yourself and then pay attention to something else, right? Take your kids to the soccer game. And like, that's really my target audience,
Yeah.
But it seems so small, doesn't it? It seems so small, like in terms of things that people like that as kinks or whatever. It just seems so incredibly harmless if you can just think of it as, something fun that you do that is, it turns you on. I mean, people are into really sick stuff, like harming other people, and it's very common. But I mean, this doesn't seem that bad at all. Like, oh, you like wearing skirts and makeup, well, like a big whoop, right? Like, I think the real harm is when, it takes over your entire life, and then you have to do all this medical stuff, and you have to always worry about what every single person down the street is thinking of you, and
and you start demanding that people refer to you in a certain way and have access to certain things. Yeah, totally. Well, and that's also, I mean, the GC movement is so off the, I mean, it's just, it's like so woke. And I guess that was in many ways bound to happen because, well, there's lots of paths into this, into sort of being anti-trans, right? There's the more straightforward, I started on the right, I am socially conservative in some way, so I never approved of these things. Then I think there's the much more common route, like of people who are come up from the left, and they okay, let me gather my thoughts. It seems like so many people involved in this conversation now still need there to be a victim. And so people allow themselves to be anti-trans because they're doing so to be protecting women and protecting gay people. And it's like you're only allowed to do this if you're sticking up for another marginalized group. So Diane, I'm totally with you. What the hell does it matter if someone is into cross-dressing? But there are a bunch of people calling themselves gender critical who say that's a woman face, and it's inherently damaging because you are appropriating womanhood and you are fetishizing and sexual, and it's like I'm so sick of it. I'm so sick of this.
I mean, I think the woman face term is kind of funny because, okay, please, like, I don't know what line of work you guys are in, but if you've ever seen a software engineer pull up to her software, like an AGP with a software engineering job, pulling up to the office wearing a clubbing outfit and like 3-inch strappy stilettos, full clubbing makeup, hair did, and it's like, you are a software engineer, ma'am. Look around you at all of the other female software engineers. Is a single one of them dressed like they're going clubbing today? Okay, so no, it doesn't make sense to be like, oh, but you know, this person was born in a male body but is actually a woman. No, because look around at all the other women. They're not doing this. To me, it makes much more sense. Like, this guy just likes dressing like this. It turns him on. Like, fine, go ahead. Like, that, on the other hand, just makes, doesn't it? Just seems like such a better explanation for it.
Yeah, I have to say that, like, in terms of the whole, like, the woman fit, it's like inherently evil, and it shows that you see us as like a consumer product, and your skin suit, all that. I'm just done with it, right? And like the thing about it that I really find like most annoying is like the narcissism that I would care that what their opinion is, right? You know, like that's the thing that, like, I got one of these the other day who's just like going on and on at me about this, and it's just like, it's inherently evil, it shows that you hate women and all this stuff, and I'm just like, okay, well, you're nobody, right? You're a stranger on the internet. Like, why? Like, how dare you presume that like you have any control over like these choices that I make that don't affect you in any way, right? Like,
well, like Torin had said that I'll edit out his name. I actually probably don't care, but anyway, he said that the GCs and the TRA should really be able to bond over their sense of entitlement, because they really are just like they can just be able to tell people how to perceive them, and it's pretty pretty remarkable.
Yeah,
it's really also.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was gonna say it's just also like it's kind of they are kind of like, I don't know, they like pretend to be sex realists, but they're kind of blank slatists too. It's like, if we really want to get into it, I mean, yes, men objectify women, and also
they're objecting to heterosexual, like male heterosexuality.
Right. And also, just like sexual objectification is like necessary for the survival of our species. And like, and maybe I'm an atypical woman, and we've talked about this on the show, like it's going to matter who's doing the objectifying, but like women also like to be sexually objectified. Not every woman, not in every situation, but the whole thing is just like ridiculous. And it's I see it as another version of woke, of like trying to make like women are so oppressed. It's like women are not oppressed because men want to have long hair and do their nails and makeup. And it's like the oppression of women has to do with just the fact that we are the literally smaller and therefore more vulnerable sex. The rest is like kind of noise.
It's also exactly woke, like you were saying, in their tendency to catastrophize, right? Because it's like, you really feel harmed by the thoughts in someone else's head. It's like, if that's how you're going through the world, like that's
good point.
That's really bad for you, not for them. Like,
good point. They're continuing to bastardize all of this language that we complain about. Like, no one is harming you by doing woman face the same way that a trans person is not harmed by being misgendered. Like, stop it. Stop it. And it's when I realized too that I really am a liberal, because like, no, I actually don't give a shit about people cross-dressing at all. I actually don't care. Like, I'm completely comfortable with it. We should have exception. Things should require, you should need to match the appropriateness of your environment. But that should go, for either sex and, whatever you're wearing.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I really, no side of this conversation entirely, you know, of the broader public conversation about trans issues really satisfies me. And like, I really do think that like we need some sort of like, you know, there's probably some work that could be done on the terminology, but just like a solid like sex realist branch, right? Because I think a lot of the reason that the gender critical, you know, sort of movement went off the rails is because of the TERF contingent, right? Where they're saying essentially like, okay, third wave feminism, where we just like straight up deny the existence of sex, meaningful sex categories, right, is bad. We need to go back to second wave feminism, where we only deny any innate mental differences between the sexes, right? And this is also not true, right? So it was just trying to fight a more extreme, you know, version of blank slateism with like yesterday's version of also nonsense blank slateism, right? And like that's never going to work, right? And they're like, oh, the thing that's bad about, you know, trans people is that they reinforce stereotypes or something. It's like stereotypes are generally accurate, right? Not in every case. There's outliers. We're all outliers on this call. We all know that. None of us are typical for any of the things that we are, right? But stereotypes are generally accurate, right? So you see all these. It is just like it's a factional war within woke, basically, right? Where it's just like all these people who don't want to have a serious, you know, scientific conversation about either sexuality or sex differences, right? And instead they each have their own religion about these things, and those it's a holy war between these two religions, and like that's no good, right? And then you know, off in the wings you have like, you know, the super low openness, like, you know, religious traditionalists who are perfectly happy to say that like I don't like it either because, you know, I've decided that God hates it or because it's yucky, right? And like none of these things are just, forget, you know, whether I like them or not, they're not going to work, right? Like these things, they're not rooted in reality, and nothing that's like not rooted in facts can ever be functional in the long run. So like if we actually want to figure out how to deal with people who have dysphoria and create the most like functional, harmonious, prosperous society we can, given this, where we stop fighting about it and it's not a major political issue anymore, none of the mainstream approaches are going to work, right?
Yeah.
I
completely agree. Yeah, and I think it's like they're somewhat successful. They're successful recruiting strategies, I guess. Like and Aaron and I have talked about this, like that. You know, identifying with this idea of like they're sterilizing gay kids, and you know, like you said, that like trans ideology is reinforcing stereotypes when we were supposed to be breaking them and busting them. That's what got me in the door in many ways, right, to the conversation. And I'm glad I'm in the conversation, and I'm glad I've woken up to how ridiculous and anti-scientific and anti-reality all of these things are. But yeah, it's not actually productive. And it does just seem like so many people get in this just to be another type of victim, and to just keep bitching about stuff. And I realized at a certain point, and I think too, there's a part of this that is people like me, and maybe like you guys. It sounds like, Hunter, you said you were like vaguely progressive for a while, but well, so much of, I think, changing your mind and like coming out as a contrarian or a heterodox person is like needing the permission to do so to a certain extent. And so I think especially the feminist view on gender ideology gives women in particular, some women in particular, the permission that they need to question some of this stuff, because they can do it and still be a good person. I'm still on the left. I'm still a feminist. I'm still a good person, but I'm saying these things. And so I guess that's kind of good if it's getting them in the door. I don't know, but I think ultimately it's not, because it's another lie. And you're so right. It is people saying we got third wave feminism wrong, back to the second wave. And many of the people in this conversation are those prominent feminists who were like part of this at every way, and who were saying, oh yeah, no, I got it wrong here, but I was wrong, but I was right back here. And it's like, I don't care about anything you have to say anymore. Yeah.
I think a major problem here is that a lot of the people who are participating in the whole gender critical discourse are doing so just to spleen vent. Like they're not actually interested in pragmatic solutions or like anything sustainable, you know, real world solutions here. It's like this is, you know, I'm not sure if we're all familiar with like the problems of like mass psychosis in the age that we're in, and how prominent they are. But I think this is that for so many people. It is their, you know, it's something that they get to put all their free floating anxiety into. It's the trannies ruining everything. And if they actually have a real solution for that, if there's actually something pragmatic, feasible way out, it's like they've lost their religion, their holy war that gives them so much meaning, and takes away all the dread of real life, because it's all this one group's fault.
Yeah, no, 100%. And this is like a very common psychological pattern we see. And this is, you know, a sort of a good example of something I said earlier about how, like, you know, certain mental tendencies might be like kind of innate in people, but how they manifest is obviously influenced by, you know, a variety of factors. But I see kind of the same attitude with slight permutations in like the super extreme, like, you know, GC people, and then like the Jewish question people, or like the really intense, you know, like systemic racism people, right? It's just, it's all just like externalizing responsibility, because like you're probably not happy in some deep way. And so like looking inward is painful. And so you spend all your time looking outward at like the who's causing me to hurt in this way, right? Even if like a lot of these people haven't actually had any personal experience with any of the people that they think are responsible for all of their woes.
Yeah.
Sort of collectively and psychically from they've generated a miasma between them. It's not that any specific person hurt them, you know? And you know, again, like, you know, you know, I would guess that like the way that I like differ from definitely not all, but a significant segment of my audience the most is that like I'm much more like high openness, and like you know, I'm much less like you said, in certain ways, like I'm a liberal at heart, you know, in like the old school sense. And like, you know, I'm not against like adults transitioning in principle, you know, and like a lot of them want that, you know, they want to ban it for everybody or something. And it's just like, just for, you know, kind of like libertarian reasons that feels wrong to me. My only interest is like in people making informed choices, right? I just, you know, and like if you're told, you know, I don't think it's informed consent if you know, because this happens all the time, right? If medical professionals and societies and academics are all telling you you have to take this drug or you'll die, right? And that is not true, right? That is not true. And like if somebody starts you on a medication under that premise, then you have not given informed consent. You're not only uninformed, you've been actively misinformed, right? Yeah. And so that's my only interest, right? Is you know, it's just like stay away from the kids. And like let's make sure that like adults are actually receiving all the information and all the options, right? It's like, okay, this is actually why you feel this way. There are several, you know, people feel it different amounts and in different ways. There are several ways you could respond to this, right? Transition is one of them. But you could also, you know, try to do what I did, right? And that's really all I want, you know.
I think that's why we think it's so important that people understand the autosexual experience, because it's like then you know where it's coming from, and you can only do that which you need to do to alleviate any distress or suffering. Without it, people just go, oh, you know, this means I am this and I transition or whatever. But I think if people, right. But if people understand, it's like, okay, no, I want this, or I despise this or whatever because it's this specifically about the other sex that I want to manifest or whatever. It's like you can just tailor make your, you know, trans experience, so to speak, and not, you know, entirely blow up your endocrine system or your family or, you know, whatever it may be. To solve that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it'd be great if people just like were aware of I don't know, the least invasive things that they could do to feel better. And then if that doesn't help, then I guess progressively try to increase, I don't know, the riskiness or the invasiveness of what they try. But why not just start off somewhere like, okay, well, you know, maybe this will be alleviated if it's just a fun thing that you do with your partner in the bedroom. Try that and see if it kind of makes you feel better and it's no longer, you know, occupying this large sector of your brain. And then if that doesn't work, then you can try something more intense. Why not?
Totally. And I think what all of us are saying is why, like, again, knowledge of, at least within the realm of clinicians and dysphorics, knowledge of autosexuality and what's underlying this is so important. Yes, I completely agree. It should be the least invasive first. And like you're saying, I mean, yeah, try doing certain things in the bedroom with your partner. Try like hair removal, you know, and that could mean start with waxing before you even go, you know, the electrolysis route, right? And there are also ways to like, there are people who continue to live as men with families who take a form of HRT basically, because that like soothes them in some way. Maybe it's reducing their testosterone levels, you know, it makes them feel less manly, which makes them feel more, whatever it is. There are a million things in between. And the reason, again, that we need to that we need a better, at least clinical understanding of autogynephilia in particular is so that people don't feel the need to go all the way. Because right now that is the only, you are trans. And yes, people will say, you know, trans people don't owe you binary, whatever, you know, and like, I'm glad I think that the trans meds hate that aspect of the gender goblins. They hate that they're saying, you know, trans people don't need to get surgery. Trans people don't need HRT. I'm sort of glad that exists because I don't want everyone rushing into, you know, genital surgery and stuff like this when they don't need to. And I think there are people who, like you, Hunter, they have the AGP bug.
The two cutes were the true gatekeepers all along.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I think right, telling people that they're trans, then they start needing to prove their femininity, right? And needing to be perceived as a woman, whereas you could maybe these little incremental things will satisfy someone, will allow them to live more functionally. But yeah, that requires honesty in the conversation. But I'm totally with you that it needs to be true informed consent, which is just severely lacking right now to an astonishing degree. Like you know, it's easy to say these doctors are like grooming and whatever, when really most of these patients are coming begging for these procedures. But it is astonishing how little these doctors actually understand about the condition and even like the basic science of it. I mean, some of these doctors are actually talking to their patients about changing their hormonal sex, you know, like they are telling them things that is just bad and not true. And yeah, so we're very far from an actual informed consent model, but I do think that should be where we land with adults.
Yeah, I would be surprised if there's like one like clinic that provides like cross-sex HRT in the country that tells people about the two-type model. I bet there's not. Right. I bet there's not even one, you know. But yeah, and it's funny, you know, it matters so much that like the way that we like sort of chunk reality like matches the territory. Like something you said earlier about like whether people are really gay or something, and you know, tells me that you have some of these same complaints. But like people get attached to like a category that exists in our language, right? Like a word like gay, and then they insist upon it in this really aggressive way. As if that like had to be reflective of reality, right? So like, you know, during my transition, like I had sex with men and I'm not attracted to men, right? And it's like, so like you can say I'm like behaviorally bisexual or something, but like it would not be accurate to refer to me as bisexual in any sort of meaningful way, right? I don't look at men and find them sexy, right? Looking at pictures of men is not arousing to me, right? It was entirely driven by meta attraction and was mostly like a very bad experience. So like, you know, but yeah, people get super attached to these categories, right? And now we have this category of like trans or not, which is like two different things, one of which has like a million little sub variations, right? And neither of which are like this like totalizing like gender spirit, you know? And it's just the map is so bad, and people are, you know, the map of the territory is so bad and people are just walking off cliffs.
Yep.
Yeah.
Agreed. Very well put.
Yeah. This is something that Taftaj, I don't know. I always fuck up how you say her name, but she said something to this effect recently, which is like the wider the gulf between reality and like what trans activists claim to be true, the more trouble the trans people are going to have, which is right. People can only deal with my words are so bad, but people are gonna suss out, right, if what you're feeding them is horse shit, basically, at a certain point, and it's not going to work. And yeah, people are so concerned with terminology and so concerned with what ought to be rather than what is, and just like they're averse to describing reality in plain terms. Yeah, it's a problem at a societal level beyond just the gender stuff, but it really comes to a head with the gender stuff.
Yeah, I feel the same way. In the article I published recently, I said the same thing, which, so many parts of the sort of woke movement are based on forms of reality denial. But I really think that the one that killed it to the extent that it's, or mortally wounded it to the extent that it's dying is the trans issue, right? Because the thing is, like, every single prestigious institution in this country came out and said, gender is real. The way these people describe their experiences has been scientifically confirmed. If you don't think they're women, you're not only evil, you're just a dumb, ignorant hick, right? And they put the full force of all of the credibility that's been earned by the Academy over the years for, things like, physics and like, beautiful pieces of performance art and like all of the things, the real intellectual work they've contributed to our, societies. They put all of that credibility behind a proposition that normal people can see as false with their eyeballs, right? People are not going to go with this. Like, you can't, like, it was really kind of the ultimate test, right? I think if we had just totally capitulated to that, it would have been over, right? We've completely ceded our sense making to this external source and they can just dictate reality to us forever. But thankfully we didn't do that, right? And people were just like, no. So like,
snapped back, yeah.
Right. And then it's like, okay, so now I know that these institutions that I've trusted to make sense for me of issues that I don't have time to investigate, maybe they're too complex for me to investigate, I now know that they will lie to my face if they want to. So what else are they lying about, right? And sometimes this goes in bad directions, right? People question things that are true, right? Real, like very, exactly, right? But like, I have a lot of sympathy for those people, right? Rather than contempt, because not everybody, right, has a statistics background or a medical background, right? And not everybody can like comb through all these studies and compare the quality of evidence of different things and look at meta-analyses and errors they might have made and then like come to an informed conclusion about what the state of the evidence says. They were outsourcing all that to somebody else, and now they know that they can't trust that person. So how do they know which issues they're lying to them about and which ones they're not, right? They have no way of knowing. So I frankly, I have a lot of sympathy for like some of the, the conspiracy-minded, type like anti-institutional people, because they were failed, right? These institutions had a job and they maximally didn't do it, right? They completely betrayed their charge, and now everyone's like, okay, well, I'm not listening to anything you have to say.
This is one of the many reasons I think we're heading towards like a complete civilizational, hopefully not collapse and instead just a reshuffling. But it's like, if we can't, like, we have no, like, the bedrock of our institutions has disintegrated. And so who, like, nobody had, and even if they didn't, like, let's say it would be better if the facade was still there, because that's better than everybody knowing that they can't trust them. Because I don't sound like a crazy conspiracist here, but that's not the case. It's just that these are obviously institutions are made up of people, and people are fallible, and they follow the wrong PR trajectory. But my issue is like, without having those without people having faith in those institutions, we have no stable society. And so like, what comes next is really what's concerning. But I was going to say, I've said this a few times, that I think the reason, like in 1984, Orwell kept saying, using the metaphor of 1 + 1, or is it 2? 2 + 2 = 4. Is like, that was so much more believable than if the party had said you must believe that a male is a female. Like, that would not have worked in fiction. It's too insane. Like, it was too far. But we went too far, way too far. Yeah. Now we're going to see what trails in the wake.
Yeah.
No, but you're right. I have sympathy for a lot of the conspiratorial minded people out there. We have a real crisis of authority, like everyone here is saying, and there's a name for this phenomenon that I can't remember what it is, but it's the phenomenon where when you know a lot about something and then you see the media or whatever institution get it wrong, right? Then it's like, well, holy shit, all the other things that I didn't know that much about that I haven't been able to invest time in. What else have they been getting wrong or worse, lying to me about? And I always get, I'm skittish around the lying part. Like right. I like to believe that it's more that like people get things wrong and or like are true believers in many ways. Because again, I was a leftist and I was a true believer. I was until I realized that it was retarded. And I was able to like really look at all of the internal inconsistencies and incoherence in this worldview. But so like I shy away from believing that they're lying and that they're intentionally trying to deceive, although that is the case in certain circumstances. And that's the case in certain circumstances with regard to the gender issue too. There have been people for politically motivated reasons. Maybe they think that they're lying in service of helping, you know, dysphoric people or whatever, but there is like actual lying going on. So yeah, I do think it's where do we go from here?
Yeah. You know, I don't know if we'll ever have the level of like social consensus. And again, some of this might be, you know, rose tinted glasses, right? Like it's hardly as if like the 60s and 70s were characterized by like mass consensus, right? It was a time of, you know, upheaval and like bitter conflict. But like, I don't know, you know, maybe you could take the 80s or something, but like, I don't think we're going to go back to a society that like all agrees on at least like the key aspects of a central narrative, right? And, you know, I don't know that that's bad. You know, the thing is like, I'm pretty like fault tolerant and I'm interested in systems that are robust, not systems that are perfect, right? And so I'm kind of optimistic that like a more anarchic information environment, right, will certainly lead to a lot of people getting things wrong that they wouldn't have otherwise, but it will also lead to finding certain truths that people wouldn't have found otherwise, right? You know, so like there are lots of, you know, subreddits, they're, you know, probably the entire Blue Sky site, right, where you can't say any of the things that we're saying here, right? You also can't be a vaccine denier or say that the Jewish space lasers are coming to get you, right? But that's the price you pay, right? Fundamentally, like, I don't trust anybody to gatekeep these things for me. And like, does a lack of gatekeeping come with a cost? Absolutely. But my personal opinion is it's worth it.
Yeah, I hear that. That was a similar thing that kind of woke me up to like the importance of free speech, basically. And it had to do with like my views about like some like Israel stuff and Zionism, but I just like realized like that Jews actually Jews are have a tendency to veer towards veer towards censorship, I think, for maybe understandable reasons. But actually Jews need free speech because what if, you know, I mean, at that time when I was on the left, my example that was so salient to me was like, what happened if Rashida Tlaib becomes the next president and now Zionism is hate speech or something, right? And like something that I believe in is suddenly like illegal or unacceptable. And so I came down to the same conclusion. It's like, I don't trust other people to be the arbiters of truth, really. And that is a problem in certain institutions like academia, where like we at least need transparency in the process so people can come to their own conclusions about like what is true. And Aaron and I kind of talked about this a couple episodes ago of like how much of even like the peer review process, like we really only see the data that people are choosing to analyze and present and publish, and we actually often don't even see the data. We almost never get access to the full data sets. Like we're so limited in even what we know from academia. So I think I actually appreciate that optimism, Hunter, that like with just information decentralized, I guess, in a way, that at least more people will have access to getting to the truth. I hope people will get to the truth. But yeah,
some will, some
but there's also going to be more bullshit. Yeah, too.
Yeah. I sort of think of it as like, taking like an ecosystem like / evolutionary versus like a mechanistic view of truth, right? And the institutional view is definitely a mechanistic one, right? Where there is like, it almost seems at a certain point as if people think that like the process of peer review is like metaphysically connected to the truth in some, like you can't know anything unless it's peer reviewed in principle, right? Before we invented peer review, nobody knew anything, right? They were just guessing and they got lucky sometimes, right? But like, that's like the mechanistic view of truth, that there's like a process and a procedure. And if you follow this process and procedure, turn the crank and true things come out, right? And like, that's obviously not the case, right? Like, and as soon as you create like fixed criteria, just like we were talking about inclusion in women's spaces, right? As soon as you create these fixed criteria for things, people will just hack them, right? Because it's generally easier to hack the criteria than it is to actually come up with new, true knowledge. That's really hard, right? That's really hard. And it's never certain, right? You can't ever be sure your idea will work out, right? It's probabilistic necessarily. So like, it's way easier if you can just be like, oh, okay, so truth means something that checks these 5 boxes. I can check these 5 boxes, right? So, also, if you follow like Crimea on Twitter and stuff, like there's a tremendous amount of fraud, even in like non-politically charged fields, right? In the sciences, right? The medical sciences, to some extent, the harder sciences, right? There's just and we can detect this, sort of statistically in aggregate, right? Without knowing like which specific papers are fraudulent, but there's so much publication bias, right? So like, even outside of like these really hot button issues, like the machine hasn't been working for a long time, right? And it's like, it's calm and stable, but it's not even really accurate, right? So like, I don't think we're losing as much as we think, shifting into, an evolutionary perspective where everything's out there. You can choose to follow really good sources of information or crazy sources of information that are going to tell you all kinds of wild stuff that will feed into all your mental illnesses, right? And people will just sort into these different buckets. And, some people will have access to like a higher quality and higher density of useful information than was ever possible under the institutional model. And some people will start fantasizing about like, space aliens or, like weird government kidnapping plots or something. Right. And like, I don't know that we can do better than that.
Yeah.
You can also just think of the informational system sort of from an evolutionary standpoint too. Like the people who gravitate towards higher value or more truthful sources of information, they're going to have an advantage over the people who don't, who are just consuming like whatever nonsense confirms whatever they wanted to hear, right? Like knowing the truth will help you have an edge and like live your life better, be more competitive. So maybe it all works itself out in the end.
Yeah, I completely agree with this. And this is like my bait. This is the source for my hope, basically, is that the sort of the Wild West approach will not align the masses to the truth, right? It won't like get all the little, magnetic arrows all pointing the same way. But I do believe there will be a positive correlation between, in particular, someone's economic power and their propensity to be good at navigating this process, right? Just because, exactly as Diane said, the reason we care about truth is because it's useful, right? So like people who are generally good at knowing true things are more likely to build more wealth. So like, well, by head count, right, this process might result in like fewer people being aligned with, with different truths overall. I think weighted by power, which is kind of matters more because those are the people that make the decisions, then I think it'll actually be better.
Maybe once all the data is, because we're going to, everything's data driven now. So once maybe all this data is available, accessible, we can just ask the AI what the truth is and it'll be revealed for us. No more human investigation, no more peers to review. Just ask the question. The data's there.
Trust our robot overlords.
Yep.
No, I will instead be asking the autists because they're the ones who are going to figure out what's really going on.
Yeah, but we're also kind of especially susceptible to believing some really asinine things if it gives us what we want. Speaking from experience.
Or is internally consistent. Yeah. It's like the system's so pretty though. It all fits together. I don't care if it's false. Like,
I just like this one. I like it.
The texture feels nice.
Very soft and fuzzy.
There you go.
This has been a blast.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for coming to talk to us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was a ton of fun.
Cool. All right. Take care, everybody.